Hi everyone. So this is Carrie, and here we are in week 8. And at this point, I'm hoping that you've taken a little bit of time to go over the Unit 3 essay assignment, which is essentially a researched argument where you will be arguing for what you think is the good life, not just based on your own personal opinion, but based on the research, thinking, writing, reading that we're doing during Unit 3. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to give you an overview of how we're going to approach this unit as far as writing this paper goes. I'm sure all of you have done research writing at some point, and so I just want to take some time to help us think about how to avoid some of the traps that students sometimes fall into when writing research type of papers. And so I'm hoping I can point you in a more productive direction. Okay, so as someone who's taught a lot of research writing and composition over the last 10 or 12 years, I've seen a very common approach to writing research papers that is quite problematic, but I think it's sort of a default approach that a lot of students go into, and it may be because they just haven't had the experience of having an authentic research topic or something that they actually cared about learning about. And so what I often see is something like this. The first step, students might have a topic, something like happiness, let's say. Or maybe they have just sort of a gut feeling opinion about some topic that they've decided they're going to research. So they go out and they do their Google searches on that topic, that really broad topic, and they start to come into contact with some interesting material. Maybe they start to read that material, they sort of get sucked into the research, and they may be enjoying themselves, but at some point those students usually start to feel a little overwhelmed by the research, like they've lost their way. So they're doing all this reading, they're doing all this investigating, but they don't really have a clear purpose or focus for what they're actually supposed to be looking at and how they're supposed to be organizing their research. And so this is down here in step 2. They're just sort of doing all this research. And at some point, these students usually realize, oh boy, I have to write a research paper. I have to write an essay now that I need to turn in. And so what they start to do is they pile this research into a paper, and no doubt they create a document, I would say, but it often ends up being not a very purposeful document. And so maybe it lacks a clear thesis or purpose. So maybe it raises all kinds of ideas, but I don't get a sense of the writer's actual position or argument. Another problem that I sometimes see is quote heaviness, where students get pulled into all these documents, and they've highlighted so many of their documents, and then they want to cram all of those highlighted sections into a paper, but they've done so in such a way that isn't easy for the writer to sift through. And furthermore, the writer may lose track of who's controlling the paper. They might not sense that the reader may lose track of who's controlling the paper. They don't sense the writer's voice there anymore. And so that's problematic. Sometimes this can leave readers feeling confused as to what the writer's actual position is. So it may not even feel like an argument at all. It may just feel like we call this like a quote quilt, I guess, sometimes, just a patching of all of these different sources that doesn't really amount to anything. And so, that is kind of a research trap, I think, that some students fall into. And some of us who teach composition, we like to refer to this as more of a data dump than a purposeful paper. So why does this happen? Well, I think it just happens because, we're not researchers in our regular lives. Quite often this isn't something that we're used to doing. We haven't discovered authentic processes for how to get involved and invested in our research process. And so I want to suggest a different process, which I think is a more authentic, productive approach. And I'm really hoping that all of the activities and discussions that we have for the next couple weeks in class are going to lead you down this path of this other approach. And so this is really a recursive process, so it's hard for me to drop it into linear steps here, but I'm going to try to do that just so that you can get a little bit of a feel for what I'm thinking. So step 1, we're going to start with a question, not a topic. So rather than having something really broad like happiness or the good life, we're going to ask a specific question. The question is, what is the good life? Or if you want to be more specific, what should a person do to achieve the good life? If you look at the assignment sheet for essay number 3, you'll notice that Eric and I actually gave you the question. So we're not giving you a topic and asking you to formulate your own research question, but that is something that will often happen in your college classes. Let's say you're taking an anthropology class or a psychology class or an effective communications course. You may be given several topics to choose from. And my recommendation is to always start by turning those topics into narrow, focused research questions. Topics in and of themselves are way too broad. And you know this from being good Google searchers, that when you go in and put in a broad topic, it just, you get a sea of information, you don't know how to sift through it, and then you lose your way. And so you really need to start with a good research question. And quite often, if you begin with a topic, you might have 5 or 6 different research questions, and then at that point you have to decide, which one am I going to go with? And that may take some time to look into and decide. But in this case, Eric and I have given you the question, and essentially it is, what is the good life, or what should a person do to achieve eudaimonia or the good life? So you have the question already. You don't even need to do that work. Step 2 is to investigate and to inquire openly. So rather than limiting yourself to what you currently think or what your gut reactions are, you have to take some time to see what other people are saying. And we try to expose this to you in a couple ways. One, we give you the chapters, right? And in these chapters of engaging ethics, you encounter all of these ideas and, references to research and philosophers that you may not have considered before. And so this is one way where you can start to build, sort of a toolbox of ideas. Another way that we get at this is through our class discussions. So you are doing investigation when you're in there discussing this stuff with your peers. You're figuring out, what is it that other people think about this? I might think that the good life looks like this, but what does somebody else think it looks like? And, are my ideas subjective or are they objective? And if I do think my ideas are objective, do I have a way to support those? So all of this kind of stuff that we're doing in the activities and in the discussion board is all geared toward helping you with step 2 here, where you're investigating ideas and you're inquiring so that you can start to nail down what you think your actual position might be, or what your answer to this question up here might be. And if I can backtrack for a second, the answer to this question should really be your thesis claim. So whenever you decide what it is that you think the good life should consist of, or at least a few criteria for a good life, then that is essentially how you're going to answer this question and how you're going to provide an anchor and a focus for your paper. Step 3. In this case, we're going to investigate further. If this was a paper that didn't require outside research, we might stop at step 2. We might say, let's just stick with what we have in engaging ethics. Let's just talk to each other. But we're going to ask you to go one step further. We want you to go out and do a little bit of research, to actually go to the library databases, which we will learn how to do in class, to see what some of the most current cutting-edge research is on this topic. What are people saying today? What are they writing about in things like, I don't know, I see these articles come up quite often in magazines like The Atlantic or Scientific Mind. You probably see this kind of stuff all the time on the internet, these articles about the keys to happiness, and they're trying to draw on the current banks of research that are out there. And so we're going to ask you to do a little bit of investigating on your own, and maybe you'll be able to bring in some information that the rest of us haven't already encountered in our engaging ethics reading. Step 4, at some point, and I'm calling it step 4, you're going to need to determine what your position or answer is to the research question, and you're going to need to mold that into a short working thesis claim. And the reason why I call this a working thesis claim is it can change. You just have to get something down. It's like clay. You just have to mold it into something. That doesn't mean that later on you may not read something or come across something or hear something back from Eric that makes you think you want to change it. You can go back and change it, but it's good to get something down. So here's an example. If I were writing a paper like this, I might say something like, the good life or flourishing can be achieved by practicing gratefulness, giving away more, and cultivating fecund pleasures. So I would know as a writer that I'm going to develop 3 things in this paper. Maybe an act of practicing gratefulness, maybe this idea of giving away more, and then Mill's idea about cultivating fecund pleasures. Now, one thing I want to emphasize to you is that this paper is not asking you to lay out in 5 pages everything that you think a person needs to have to achieve the good life. It may not even be the 3 things that you would put at the top of your list. We want you to think about this as researchers and philosophers, okay? So not necessarily in ways that you're normally thinking about this. You know, we want to push you outside of your comfort zone a little bit. So we don't want you to just say, you know, things that you could have listed before taking this class. We want you to think about what are some of the new things that you can list based on the research that you've done and the discussions we've had and so forth. So if I was really, you know, writing this outside of the context of philosophy and ethics, would I necessarily list these 3 things? I don't know. Maybe I would include 1 or 2 of them, but you have to consider your context, that you're writing this for an ethics class. And so what criteria or pieces do you think make the most sense for a thesis? Step 5, determine how you're going to support your thesis. We talked a little bit about evidence with the last paper. This paper gives you a much broader opportunity to bring in evidence. There is so much that you could use to support your points in this paper. You could use material from Engaging Ethics. You could use any of the references that Eric uses in Engaging Ethics, any of those outside resources, or you could use your own research as well. You could use personal experience, you could use examples, you could use just about anything that you can think of to pull in as data. And so how are you going to go ahead and support that thesis? Step 6, consider your audience and your readers. We're going to ask you to test your ideas out on your peers and other people in class to see if they actually are persuasive. So this again is something that we're going to do in the discussion boards. We want you to be thinking about where might readers doubt your claims. If they are going to come at you with any objections or doubts, how are you going to go ahead and address those objections or doubts? Where might they agree with you? Where might they not agree with you? And in doing all this, we're going to talk about appealing to things called ethos, pathos, and logos. And we'll learn about that. And these are just techniques that you can use to make the writing more persuasive to your reader. A lot of you are already using ethos and logos extremely well. I noticed this in essay number 2. And so we're going to build on what you're already doing well. And then finally, step 7, as you're writing, we want to make sure that your voice and your overall argument guide the paper. Sources should be brought in to add weight to your point, but the sources should not take control or hijack the paper, completely throwing you out. So we want your voice. We want your guidance in this paper. We want to hear what you have to say, and that's really, really important to us. You can bring your sources in to add weight to what you're saying, but don't make this about just patching together a bunch of sources. Eric and I care a lot more about what you think and using your sources to support that rather than what all the researchers are necessarily saying. And then lastly here, the global step. Along the way, throughout all of this, you're going to be doing some writing and drafting. You'll see that I build that in. We're going to be sharing ideas on the discussion boards. We're going to be generating and testing ideas. So everything that we do over the next couple of weeks in class is going to be geared toward one of these steps to help bring you to what we think will be an authentic and meaningful or purposeful argument. And so that's the goal for this unit in terms of the approach we're taking for the writing. And so I hope that makes sense to you, and I really hope you can see how all of these things we do over the next few weeks are going to plug into this overall sort of trajectory or sequence of thinking and writing that I've laid out here for you. Okay, so finally, before we close out, I just wanted to share a little friend with you here. And I know some of you already know who this little friend is because a lot of you have probably seen this on YouTube. There's a pretty fun little video / song out there right now. And if you haven't seen it, you can go ahead and just Google, "What does the fox say?" Take about 3 minutes of your time and give yourself a little kick. My kids got a kick out of this one, so if you have kids, they'll probably find this amusing too. But anyways, this is your extra credit for having watched this video. So just shoot me a little email over D2L that's titled "What does the fox say?" and you will have earned your extra credit. So thanks, everyone.